Hey everyone, it's me again. This one went through a lot of different stages, and it ended up in the video that you're seeing today. Let's talk about tier lists, power levels, and most of all, the actual discussion around these concepts. While this video is Forsaken oriented, I'm aiming with this video to equip you, and especially any younger and less experienced viewers, with the knowledge you need to go without a tier list and instead identify yourself what you value and what makes certain things in games good. You can absolutely apply some of these things we'll be talking about here to just about any game that has more than two options at your disposal. It's important to establish where tier lists actually come from and what their purpose is before we go any further. Tier lists primarily come from the fighting game community, primarily the 2D kind such as Street Fighter, Tekken, and Guilty Gear. Fighting games are a wonderful genre and are at their most widely enjoyed in the tournament scene, both as a highly competitive player and a casual viewer. This is really the only environment where tier lists are actually relevant, because most tournaments are the games at their most competitive and some of the highest skill and most demanding environments. The more prestigious the tournament, the tougher the competition. That's just how sports are. The tier list is a list for characters that are at their most viable at the highest level of play, or at the very least when both players are at least of comparable skill and knowledge levels on the game. Tier lists really only matter that much when you're playing in one of these types of environments or against high-skill players who really know the ins and out of a game. In a casual environment, they really don't matter all that much. But what even defines viability? There's a lot of factors to this, and it depends on the unique traits of each game. However, there are a lot of traits that you look for in a top tier or meta option in games, and we'll be primarily looking at 4 of those today. However, you can switch those 4 into 2 larger points overall. First is the skill floor and the skill ceiling of a character. The second is consistency and ease of usage. Skill floor and skill ceiling are really easy to talk about and understand. A skill floor is the minimum required skill and knowledge you need to operate a character, whereas the skill ceiling is playing a character and fully maximizing the value of said character at every possible turn. Skill ceilings vary, and they depend on the character's complexity and the nuance of their mechanics. It's important to note that a higher skill ceiling does not actually equate to a stronger character, it just means it takes more effort on the player's part to bring out their true power. Guest 1337 is the best example of this within the context of Forsaken, as by nature he's a very difficult character to get basic results with, making him have a very high skill floor, while his skill ceiling is also the highest in the game for any survivor. Our second group of points is talking about how consistent your character performs while actually playing the game. A character being mechanically easier to play matters a lot more in an environment where there's a lot of mental pressure put on you, such as in a hard game or in a tournament. An easier character means you'll make less mistakes ideally, and your basic game plan will hopefully also be easier to execute. Consistency matters a lot, for what should be obvious reasons. A character that gets consistent wins regardless of situation or matchup tends to be universally stronger. The less roadblocks you face in achieving your goal, both within the character itself and variables surrounding it, the stronger that character typically is. All of this to say, you could have a very in-depth and hard-to-play character with an incredibly high skill ceiling, and they'd probably be pretty low in a game full of characters who likely have stronger tools without needing as much skill or resources to help them. I sort of alluded to this earlier, but oftentimes the most valued tier lists are ones that come from top-level competitors who have been forged in fire, or lists composed of simply raw data of characters and their success at these top levels of play. All of this to say, anyone can make a YouTube video, and it's good to scrutinize these videos yourself as you watch them and actively ask yourself internally about your own feelings and thoughts on these things that the video talks about. Of course, this includes my own content as well. So with that preamble out of the way, how does this matter to Forsaken? Well, despite how Guest might make you feel, Forsaken isn't a fighting game. It's an asymmetrical horror game that pits the cooperation of up to 8 players against 1 player in the power role. Finding out what's good and what isn't is a much different process, and within the current scope of Forsaken, it's a lot more subjective. Let's first look at Survivor and what they want to accomplish. The goal of Survivor is to complete all the generators and then survive until the timer runs out with as many survivors alive as possible ideally. Completing generators is not required to achieve victory, but if you don't complete all generators, the odds will tremendously be in the killer's favor. One survivor dying adds more time to the clock while also making every other survivor more vulnerable in the process as the killer's selection of targets diminishes. Killers only achieve victory if all survivors die. Even if one survivor wins, it's counted as a survivor victory, albeit for the sole survivor. This is where we come to our first few actual dilemmas within discussing Forsaken's characters and their viability. Let's look at the 2 roles that have the most characters so far and are the most valued by the community: Sentinels and Supports. Almost every Sentinel is highly valued, even if some have fallen out of people's good graces recently. And the supports are almost always welcome, especially Builderman and Elliot. This is where we come to our first issue we'll talk about: team composition. Just because someone like 2-Time is good doesn't mean that everyone should play them. Quite the opposite. The less 2-Times there are, as well as the less Sentinels there are in general, the stronger 2-Time is on a statistical, fundamental level. This is not only because 2-Time is directly being nerfed by having other 2-Times on the team, but the Sentinel stun durations get weaker the more Sentinels there are on a team. Similarly, Builderman and Elliot are probably the two most universally helpful support survivors, but both get significantly weaker the more of them there are on a single team. Elliot will run into massive sustain problems due to the inability to sustain other Elliots and get more rush hours, while Builderman will almost feel non-functional at times when paired with even just one other Builderman. If you're looking to win a survivor, the first thing you probably want to do is minimize the amount of Sentinels you have, likely no more than 3 at most so your stuns stay impactful enough. From there, you probably just want to have a very diverse team to prevent stacking debuffs to maximize each character. The chances of you actually getting a good team that will also be coordinated and communicate about this type of stuff in your typical Forsaken lobby is incredibly small and probably just not worth trying to do. Noob is one of the only 2 survivalists in the game and has a lot in their kit that someone who cares about winning should value. Noob doesn't bring much to the table in terms of team support other than the ability to delete cool kid minions with Slate Skin, but Noob makes up for this by offering you tremendous self-support through various on-command buffs that take very little time to activate. If you're actually decent in a chase, you can also end up protecting your team by simply wasting the killer's time. Even if you die, as long as you spent more than 30 seconds wasting their time, you helped your team. If you're someone who is playing Shedletsky primarily because of his heal or struggling to get stun value, you should probably play Noob. Similarly, if you're struggling to be effective as support and there's already supports on your team, consider playing Noob. One of the best ways to deal with damage is to avoid taking it altogether. Noob brings a lot to the table for the individual, it's just not as explosive as a stun or a heal, and more importantly, it just increases your own personal odds of survival, and as such, victory quite a bit. Remember earlier when I said survivors win just as long as one person survives? Noob is arguably the best last man standing character in the game, and there's no easier character to consistently win them with. N7 is in a similar boat as another survivalist, but he's a lot more unreliable to play. If we're valuing consistency, which we should, Noob takes the cake here. If you're someone who's looking to help your team, but you're struggling as a support or sentinel, you can at least play Noob to prevent adding stacking debuffs to your team and focus on yourself and your own survival. After all, if you die fast, you're gonna hurt your team anyways. If you're already good at the game, Noob opens up even more as you can intentionally bait the killer into chases, and you'll always be able to know that you can support and sustain yourself without needing to be as reliant on high-risk maneuvers or teammates as other survivors. Survivalist and playing selfishly is truly fine, and that's not something that's said enough. Sometimes it's necessary depending on the types of teammates you have. Just because a character does not have loud or direct teamplay options does not mean they're a bad survivor. It depends on what you value. If you value teamplay, a sentinel or support is going to seem more appealing. However, if we're talking about pure individual performance and winning, Noob is one of the best options in the game. It's important you don't tunnel vision yourself into just seeing that a character has team support, they're good, and if they don't, they're bad. This game is not as easily solvable as just that.
Fight you? No, I want to kill you.
Next up, we have matchups. I think until we get several more killers and survivors and niches start to overlap, I think it's a lot better to look at a character's strength through their matchups than it is a direct comparison through a singular, unified tier list. Each character has their own specific role they fulfill, both on the survivor and killer side, so direct comparisons aren't too great at the moment. Guest is probably the easiest character to highlight the importance of matchups in, due to the reasons mentioned earlier in this video. Jason and Cool Kid can be tougher matchups due to their generally unreactable M1s, and Cool Kid has ways to bypass block entirely. However, Guest can get a block out of teammates getting hit by Gashing Wound, or properly reacting to a walk speed override. Outside of that, Guest has to either go for certain block setups and tricks, or just make raw predictions. On the opposite side, John Doe and 1X's M1s are quite reactable by comparison, but they make up for it by having extremely strong zoning abilities, and none of their abilities consistently giving a punch charge. Being properly zoned by John Doe is basically death regardless of which survivor you're playing, and 1X's whole goal is using projectiles for kill power, which greatly diminishes the effectiveness of Guest's block. With Noli on the horizon, Guest might possibly get his strongest matchup yet, but we'll just have to see. I won't go over every matchup or philosophy in this video, but understanding matchups is very important, especially in a game like Forsaken. Each character you play as, against, or even with requires different approaches. Senselessly rushing down a 2-timer Shedletsky is an easy way to get stunned, for example. Swinging wildly at a Guest is guaranteeing you'll get punched in the face. If you're going against a good Builderman, you're going to have to bite the bullet and break the sentry ASAP before doing anything else. Knowing what your character has and how they interact with the rest of the characters is vital, and a character who can consistently do what they want regardless of their matchup is a sign of a strong character. Noob will always be able to use their abilities on their own time and activation regardless of whatever the killer wants or has. While Sentinels may be good at protecting themselves as much as their team, each one still has to adapt and care far more about the killer's tempo than one of the survivalists do. That's just the nature of the class roles. This is also just the nature of opportunity cost. By playing Guest, you're opting for even more ways to avoid damage at the cost of prediction and skill. whereas if you were just playing Shedletsky, you can afford to tank a hit or two to get away and heal it off after. Let's now just talk about this vague concept of potential. This vague concept I personally like to call X Factor. The term X Factor can mean a lot of different things, but in the context of this video and how I'll be using it, we'll refer to it as what's basically making a character truly explosively strong. Of all the killers in the game, 1X probably has the strongest X Factor. He's an absolutely atrocious killer to play if you can't get consistent value out of his projectiles, and doing so is easier said than done against good survivors who know how to play against you and can predict and juke your shots successfully. However, assuming you can get value out of these projectiles, you get tremendous value, and 1X will feel like the most unstoppable killer in the game. As 1X, I've had games where everything seemed all but lost with 30 seconds left on the clock, but then suddenly I land an entanglement or a mass infection and get the kill I need, and the game snowballs from there, which also happens to be one of 1X's best attributes as well, which is an extremely comfortable endgame due to Rejuvenate the Rotten. 1X is very representative of this vague concept of having an X Factor I'm referring to here. Not only does 1X have very strong comeback potential, but he also has extremely strong snowball potential. That being said, potential is potential. I'm saying that word to death here. Finding your rhythm and footing isn't always a guarantee, especially against the toughest of survivors out there. 1X can feel really terrible when he's unable to get value out of his abilities. On the near opposite side of the spectrum, we have Jason, who is in a pretty awkward state in the discussion of the game's meta, as well as the foreseeable future without any notable tweaks. Jason is a character who's hurt most by teams cooperating aggressively, but assuming they aren't, he's a fairly consistent character to get results with. He's entirely dependent on core fundamentals, from target priority and his fluid nature to stamina management and pathing. His abilities feel supplementary to his game plan, whereas for other killers their abilities are their game plan. None of Jason's abilities are as explosive as the potential of something such as Corrupt Energy or Entanglement. Jason has to work hard to close the gap and keep up his damage through basic movement, which also just happens to make any stuns or mistakes taken along the way even more detrimental. Once Jason gets what he wants though, he's extremely consistent, and it's very easy to tear apart your regular lobby as Jason. The main point I'm trying to illustrate here is that Jason is an example of a fairly average killer. He's consistent and strong, but there's nothing about him that's particularly explosive or absurd. Properly combating this killer through stuns and strong fundamentals hurts him, but as long as he's also playing well himself, he can at least kill most of your team. 1X, on the other hand, is a killer with an extremely high power ceiling, boasting many strong abilities that feel explosive to use. However, if you're unable to get value out of these abilities, he feels like he's the killer who's on the absolute rock bottom of the roster. Jason's results and power levels are a lot more consistent in your average Forsaken lobby, whereas 1X is prone to fluctuation depending on the skill of all parties involved, both survivor and killer. While I could talk your ear off about these things for longer, I think we're getting close to this video being done. So let's just clarify and summarize what we talked about, as well as give you some of my own advice. The last thing I want is for my points to be misinterpreted. Firstly, Forsaken, especially in its current state, is not a game that is easily quantifiable in just one singular tier list. There aren't many characters with overlapping niches yet, and many people who do make tier lists oftentimes have a clear bias towards characters who are capable or skewed towards team play. There aren't many survivalists in the game currently, but Noob is a pretty clear indicator of how strong they can be when put in the right hands. If your tier list is based solely around abilities that impact team play in a very direct manner, which most of them tend to be without realizing it, Noob is not going to come across as one of the best picks from the get-go. However, if we look at a tier list from an angle of who can win consistently regardless of opposing killer, teammates, or even team composition, Noob is easily one of the best survivors in the game. It's a matter of objectives, perspectives, and biases. What do you value as an individual? Do you value consistently surviving, or do you value consistently engaging with your team? Do you want to play as a character who can almost guarantee you a victory in Last Man Standing as long as you have the basic fundamentals down? Or do you want to play as a character who will hopefully prevent you from being in Last Man Standing in the first place? I think people need to care a lot more about these things more when discussing power levels in this game. Similarly, I think people need to consider stacking debuffs more as well as team diversity. Elliot is good, but not when there's 4 of him. Matchups are also a really solid way of currently identifying what's good and what isn't in Forsaken until we get more characters that end up actually fulfilling these similar roles to one another. A lot of the killers and survivors in this game don't really do the same thing in the first place. The way you interact with things matters a lot with your own selection of survivor and killer, and you want to pick the ones that play to your natural strengths the best. While both Dusakar and Builderman are both supports, directly comparing one another when they both have extremely different usage cases is a little silly, and both want different teammates and fare better against certain killers more than others. Direct comparisons are warranted, but they're not the end-all be-all. Finally, potential and X Factor. It's important to identify what characters have what and what degree this power is locked behind. Guest has a ton of power, but you're just not going to be able to realistically tap into it in 100% of your games just due to the nature of the game. The same can be said about 1X, who has extremely strong comeback potential as well as an escalating strength into endgame assuming he's getting value out of his abilities, but he falls off tremendously if you can't aim your abilities right. The same can be said about his M1s. They have an extremely high damage potential as long as you can consecutively hit them, but the chances of you actually doing that to a survivor with a functioning brain is very low. The last thing I want to leave you is with the concept of variables and what you can control in a match. Teamplay is a core element of this game, and even if you're intent on playing a survivalist and isolating yourself, you should still pitch in however you can. However, you do need to recognize that you can't control your teammates nor the behavior of a killer. A big part of getting good is just realizing you need to focus on what you can do in your immediate situation. Self-reflection is important, and whether you realize it or not, you make a lot of decisions within a match of Forsaken, and part of that even extends to your character choice before a match even starts. These decisions for you are not mine to make, nor any other YouTubers or tier list makers. You need to identify what you value and play to your strength and decisions the best you can. Some lobbies are worth playing support for, whereas other lobbies it's better sticking to your own guns and helping yourself. This video isn't to say that tier lists are actually truly that bad, it's just in the context of Forsaken, I really don't think they're that good right now. I think they'll be a lot better once this game gets far more survivors and killers, but in its current state, balance is tight enough where I think a lot of people are going about the discussion of this game's power level in a bit of a misguided manner, comparing Jason's kit to every other killer in the game when all of the killers that aren't Jason are some flavor of zoner or trapper is a little misguided. He's a completely different archetype of killer, and directly comparing them down to their specific abilities kind of misses the point of both characters. This video isn't a full discussion of such topics, nor is it all of my opinions on the matter. I'm just throwing out some of my own basic points into the discussion to hopefully move things forward in a more positive manner. Don't forget that a character like Jason can still be heavily impacted by maps, for example. With that said, I hope you learned something new on this video or have learned some new skills that you can use or think about, whether it be as mundane as watching videos or actually playing a game of your choice. If you liked the video, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and all that stuff. I hope you'll stick around for my future videos. With that said, see ya.